Welcome to All Villa, No Filler. Please subscribe to the show. Follow us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. This is Rivalries, the show where we meet fans from rival clubs. Today, I'm joined by Newcastle fan Freddie Bunn, once again for his third visit to All Villa, No Filler studios. He's on the board of the Newcastle Supporters Club in London, also known as the London Mags. Freddie, welcome back to All Villa, No Filler.
Hello, mate. Yeah, third time lucky, eh? So glad you're still having me and I've not pissed anyone off yet.
Well, I've read some of the comments on previous shows. Seems to be Newcastle fans were very annoyed at me at one time. So yeah, hopefully I'm welcome on Tyneside one day.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you know, Newcastle head to Villa on Tuesday night. Early this season, you battered us 5-1, just a few months after we beat you 3-0 at Villa Park. So it's been a bit funny for Newcastle, hasn't it, since that opening day? It looked like it was all just going to carry on from last season, and there have been some really big moments this season, like the PSG win, but it's not gone too well recently. So, how are you feeling going into Tuesday night?
I think when you say Frankie been a bit funny, I think that might be doing a little bit of heavy lifting really for us. We seem to have lost all of our footballers through to injury. So I think we're
Yeah.
kind of one of the highest in the league. We've also had the nightmare of Sandro Tonali, who you'll remember because he had such a blinder on his debut against Villa on the opening day of the season. So he's kind of out with a gambling ban for 10 months, and then
Yeah.
we've lost all of our midfield, and it's just injuries racking up left, right, and centre. So yeah, I mean, since we last spoke, we've dropped out. We've been to Europe and dropped out of it in the group stage, group of death. But I don't want that to kind of be saying as okay, that was going to be the typical outcome for us because if we'd had, you know, players fully fit, we could have absolutely gone further in that competition. You
Mhm.
know, the 4-1 home win to PSG. And then since then, yeah, unfortunately, we've dropped out of the Carabao Cup at the quarterfinals. Lost on penalties to that away at Chelsea after conceding the equaliser in the last minute. So yeah, it has dropped off a cliff a little bit. It's not been helped by in January having a back-to-back set of three fixtures being Liverpool, Man City, and now Aston Villa away, who are flying in the table. But you know, we've had a couple of weeks off. We're hoping things have reset and we're getting some players back fit. So we'll see how it's going to go.
Yeah, Newcastle's injuries have been really pretty brutal this season, and even Nick Pope diving regularly for a save, and then somehow is out for the rest of the season. Yeah, it's been pretty brutal. I mean, Aston Villa ourselves, we've had a big old injury list as well. Tyrone Mings at Newcastle, that horror knee injury, he got an Emi
Yeah.
Buendia a day before, did his knee as well. On top of that, we've had other, Pau Torres looks like he's going to be out on Tuesday night as well. So just a constant run of annoying injuries. And a lot of clubs seem to have had that this season.
Mm.
It'd be interesting to know for a sports scientist what the reason is for that. But, Newcastle in your most recent form, you've lost four on the spin in the league. You're
Yeah.
10th in the table. So what's the deal at the moment? I did watch your Man City game, and I thought first half you were brilliant. Second half, it felt like you just sat off. I didn't really quite get what that was all about. But
Yeah.
yeah. So what's going on at the moment?
I think that's the age-old question, really. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, and there was that argument about that second half of Man City, whether we could have sort of gone for it. The answer was what was left in the tank in terms of the
Right.
players. I think in terms of giving you the biggest or the best kind of like overall picture of what's going on at Newcastle at the moment is that, you know, some of the things, and this wouldn't necessarily be my opinion, this is something that's come up as a regular theme across kind of all the podcasts and media that follows us around, is that Eddie Howe is kind of one of the best Monday to Friday managers that we have like in the country. And the trouble that we've had this year is that we're an evolving club that is still kind of young in its infrastructure and being able to compete at those levels and do that
Yeah.
regularly and play sort of, you know, 2 or 3 times a week and manage ourselves in four competitions over the course of a season. So where it's kind of gone wrong is that those injuries compounded with the number of fixtures has been a real problem.
Yeah.
The way it's affected us in the league form, in which it kind of this is where the knock-on effect is Eddie not having the time to talk to the players Monday to Friday. You saw a massive difference after, you know, the Man City game, really, because Eddie Howe had a full week to train those players. So you saw a big difference from the Liverpool game going into the Man City game because there was more time to work with those players. And so that's why in that first half against Man City, we were confident that we saw the response that we needed. It was just that the injuries and the kind of, the squad kind of battery percentage, if you like, of their legs ran out of time. And so the second half, that's why we dropped off. However, this is where it's going to be interesting, is that this is another one where Eddie Howe has had the time to get those instructions in on the training pitch across the course of last week. And we've got the cup away to Fulham on Saturday. But certainly for Villa, you would think now that we're starting to become dangerous again.
Okay. Yes, there would, as I say, that first half against City, you looked like you're back to your sort of old self. So, who at present are your best performing players?
I mean, it's a really hard question because it's not necessarily a level playing field for people. I mean, like Lewis Miley, for example, has been one of our best performers, but you've got to view it in the context that he's 17. I think he's currently the youngest player to receive a Champions League assist. And I think that might be since God, I can't remember who, but essentially you're getting those kind of players coming in, but it's not really a fair representation to say that we've got good and consistent performers because there's so much change across the team. What we would say in terms of the best right now is you've got Alexander Isak, who is really at his top form at the moment. He does struggle a lot with injuries. However, you saw he was an absolute menace against Man City. Other players to be wary about is Anthony Gordon. Since coming back from the Euros, from the sort of under-21 Euros in the summer, he's been absolutely phenomenal. He's a man reborn. He struggled with instructions a lot last season from Eddie Howe, but since then, tactically, he's really taken on. As always, in the middle of the park, it's going to be Bruno Guimaraes. That's going to be the man to try and shut down. But we're still not sure whether we're going to have people like Joe Willock back. And a big loss for us is going to be that Joe Linton is now out, I think, for the rest of the season.
Yeah. Anthony Gordon, as you say, he just seems to sort of work right, pressing from the front, as well as his skill. I think he's really, really coming on, and I enjoy watching him. But I know you've got the injury crisis. So who are the sort of real key players that are missing? You mentioned Joe Ellison there. So is he a big loss?
Yeah, massively, because he's our physicality in midfield. The way that we've typically operated last season, which made us so successful, is that you had that balance of your kind of most creative player being Bruno Guimaraes, and he currently plays quite deep in our system because we don't necessarily have a well-defined number 6 in that role. And the big problem will come on later because you'll probably ask how does sort of Villa get through to the win, and that's definitely something that we can talk about in terms of cutting open our midfield. But we'd have Joe Linton, and then we'd have Joe Willock, and Joe Willock would play that kind of box-to-box role, whereas Joe Linton would offer that physicality in midfield, allowing that space and time on the ball for Guimaraes and for Joe Willock to arrive late in the box, kind of when we're attacking. So it's a huge miss for us. Players that kind of are really the workhorses of that team is going to be people like Sean Longstaff. But yeah, certainly missing Joe Linton is going to be a big one. Other than that as well, you mentioned how we defend from the front in terms of our attackers. People like Almiron as well. He's taken a knock recently. Jacob Murphy has been out for the last few months because I think he broke his arm, and then when he came back on for 10 minutes in the Champions League, he had a shoulder problem with it as well. So since then he's got to go and have surgery. So like I say, we're missing a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a pretty intense number. I mean, Aston Villa ourselves, we're missing a couple of key players. I mean, if the left-hand side of this season just hasn't been allowed to develop, which is really frustrating because last year it was so good, and we added to it by bringing in Pau Torres, who's been brilliant. Moreno's been injured all season, has only just come back. Ramsey's been out all season, only just come back and might be out again on Tuesday with a hamstring. And now Pau Torres looks like there's a mysterious injury going on with him as well. So it's just one day that left-hand side is going to play together. One day it will happen. Be like the Beatles reuniting or something. As you mentioned there, how do Villa get at Newcastle and how do they get the win?
It's a kind of crazy thing that's been going around our sort of Twitter forums and everything like that over the last 2 months. There is a big gaping hole for Newcastle United, which is that one pass pretty much cuts off our whole midfield and allows players to run very freely at the back four. Really interesting that this has come up because it's actually Unai Emery that first spotted this last season when we went to see you guys away at Villa Park. since then we've had the kind of strength in depth to be able to stop that. But with so many injuries, that's kind of where the big discussion around January for us has been another midfielder with all of our injuries, and looking at that number 6 role. I think Calvin Phillips going to West Ham is going to be a bit of a problem for us if Tuesday doesn't go well, and if we drop out of the FA Cup on Saturday. There will be fans that will be disappointed with our January business or lack of it, because we aren't necessarily fixing that midfield problem. So that's going to be the one. I mean, if you look at the Man City game, as soon as Kevin De Bruyne came on the pitch, he absolutely changed the game. I mean, who would have thought, right? But at the same time, it was so obvious about how he could do it. And he was allowed to literally run at share for about, 30 yards maybe. And then as soon as he's run into Fabian Schär's kind of opened wide to try and get side onto him. He's slotted it through his legs and into the bottom corner.
I to be honest, I have noticed it myself watching Newcastle. I think I watched the Nottingham Forest game just start of the year or end of last year.
That was a tough.
Yeah, and something, like you say, like something I really noticed was how it felt like all your players are at the front, and then you'd have them all at the back, and there's just like one lonely soul in the middle, looking around, thinking like an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, like Easter Island, looking around. Where is everybody? It was. I found that really weird. It's interesting you mentioned that that's happened quite a few times. With going at Villa ourselves, how do you have any confidence that you can get at Villa and cause us a fair few problems?
I definitely do, because I don't think, as much as we talk about these problems on the pitch and the problems off the pitch in terms of injuries, we still were able to put 2 past Man City in that first half. And I think, underestimate us at your peril. And it's really interesting, Frankie, because I was actually talking to Gav, who is your chairman of the Villa London Lions.
Yeah, great man.
Yeah, I mean, you played on the pitch before us. You got battered by Inter. Where,
I wasn't there, so
it's all right. We lost 5-3 after that to Fiorentina. So, but yeah, I was chatting to Gav, and he was kind of saying that I don't know how you feel about this, but is there potentially a lot of Villa supporters thinking that this might be a done deal, whereas actually, I mean, I would subscribe to that, because it's easy to think that when we were at Villa Park, 3-0 last season, I don't think the opening day means that much, because I think we played in some weird tournament in America 3 weeks before that, and it was very cagey, and there was a few debuts and Tyrone Mings getting injured, etc. So I wouldn't think too much about that. I'd be more looking at your Villa Park form and certainly our away form. But is there an element to say that some people are writing us off already?
I mean, no one I've really spoken to would write Newcastle off. I think there's there's probably more confidence going into it than there normally would be, given the fact, Newcastle are on quite a bad run at the moment. But I think at the same time, like Villa ourselves, like, ever since we beat Arsenal and City 3 days apart, early December, towards the end of December, it looked like all them fixtures, call it Decemberitis, kind of caught up with us a bit.
Yeah.
And, we were 2-0 up at Old Trafford, lost 3-2, just got over the line against Burnley. Just about beat Middlesbrough 1-0, 0-0 with Everton, bit unlucky not to win it, but then probably, Everton would probably argue themselves they were unlucky not to win it. So we've not been massively consistent for going on like a month now. So I'm kind of reticent going into this game, just because I know that you've got time to prepare for it, and at some point your form has to come back. Though I am confident that Villa can cause Newcastle as many problems as they can cause us, essentially. But the interesting thing for me, though, is I rather than the first game of the season, I look back to the pre-season game, where I thought in the second half of that you played well against Villa's high line, which was, I think, generally get the ball out to Trippier or a wing back who's sort of midway in your own half, and they see a run from deep against a high line, and Trippier's passing in that with that range is always perfect. He's not the perfect player for that. So in that sense, I think if Newcastle absorb the pressure from Villa and just allow us to come forward, and then get the ball to Trippier and a quick one through to Anthony Gordon who's run from deep, I think that might be a route that you can get success against Villa, I think.
Yeah, I would say that, and I would also say don't discount Fabian Schär in that, in terms of that we always have that option where. And this kind of comes back to a point that would be maybe of interest to you and your sort of listeners, is that last season, because I feel like Villa are having a very similar season to what we had last year. where you would just go and carve teams open, and everyone for the first half of the season would be very stunned. Managers don't necessarily look at it that way, and they think, okay, but by the time Christmas comes, people have started to work that out. And we entered a massive problem. I remember on New Year's Eve being at Leeds at home at St James's Park, and the game was 0-0. I think we then didn't see a win for another sort of 4 or 5 weeks at St James's Park. There were some really difficult problems, and what that was essentially that teams just went low block at us. Teams just went, right, we're going to sit behind this, especially at St James's Park, because it's like, we don't necessarily know how to get around this, but we're going to ask this secondary question of you and say, how are you going to get out of this then? How are you going to, score if you can? So what we did was exactly what you said, which is Trippier was always the kind of plan with the 1-2s with Miggy Almiron up on the right-hand side. But we also developed some other things. And also one of those, along with many, is literally the fact that Fabian Schär, with the ball in his own half, can literally pick out Joe Linton making a run from wide left. And is then one pass to clean through on goal. So we do have that ball playing quality now across our back four. So there is also like lots of different dimensions to us, which we've had to pick up. It'd be interesting to see whether you guys that feel like your formations are changing or some of your attacking moves are changing over the course of the season.
It's absolutely fascinating you say that, because that is exactly what is happening at Villa at the moment. We are now coming up against low blocks. Everton did it. And Sheffield United set the precedent. We were on a 15-game home winning run, best ever. Came up against Sheffield United, and all they did all game was sit every single player behind the ball, really deep, and we sort of fell into this pattern of play. It was a bit like watching Spain in international football in World Cups, where teams just know they just have to sit deep against Spain all the time and hit them on the break. And that's kind of what Sheffield United did to us. And would Newcastle do it? I wouldn't be surprised. I think you got the profile player to do it, and I think you got the profile player to hit us on the break. It's just that Villa, we're gonna have to work out a few different styles of play in the final third, a few different patterns to break through these low blocks. I think because there will just come a point where we are constantly drawing because we're just not breaking through defenses. But we've mentioned Kieran Trippier. He's been in funny form this recently. He's been brilliant for you. Recently linked with Bayern Munich as well. Though I believe that bid's been rejected. But is he back in form? Has he refound it, or is he struggling a bit at the moment?
I mean, I go back to Chelsea away in the Carabao Cup in the quarter-final. This was the culmination of I think a few weeks after he came home from England due to personal reasons. There's multiple rumours as to why he came back from England duty, which I won't go into. If you are that fascinated about it, you can look at it on Twitter and find out for yourselves. But there's lots of information flowing around about him and personally and how he's getting on. And naturally, he's had a dip in form before Christmas. And I go back to that Chelsea game where we're 1-0 up and we're clean through to the semis, and then he just doesn't deal with the ball in his own box. And Chelsea are able to come in, equalise and score. And then up the other end, where we were in the away end, comes the penalty shootout. And I remember him walking forward from the halfway line and saying to the boys in the stand, and them turning around to me and going, he misses this. And it was one of those things where you just knew England player coming up to penalty in bad run of form. And it was one of those horrible moments where you just had this sixth sense, which was that he's going to miss. And he did. And then, following that, we go out of the cup, etc. He has had a dip in form, but I think at his age, at 33, with the level of stuff that he's been through, I don't think there's anyone in our fan base that isn't confident that the more he plays football, the more he will recover his form. I mean, you just have to look back to the whole saga of Trippier, of him leaving Spurs but going to Atleti and working with Simeone and rebuilding his career. If there's one person you can never write off, it's Kieran Trippier. And I think, he will play his way back in.
Yeah, for sure. He's certainly a player I just think Villa needs to be very wary of, just because of those balls from deep. But as for Aston Villa players, is there anyone that sort of gives you cause for concern?
Pretty much all of them at the moment, considering the fact that looking at our bench and what we don't have on it. I think, you've always got to be wary of Ollie Watkins. You've always got to be wary of pretty much how Villa play. But I would say more that probably the whole Unai Emery setup is really what I'd be wary of. is the fact that you are going to develop those multiple options, and Unai Emery always comes to our games, especially with Newcastle, and has a plan. So I would be more concerned about the amount of goals that you're putting past sides, the fact that you're playing at home, and that is going to be very tricky for us considering we can't get out of this rut of playing away. But yeah, I mean, your goal scoring form really.
Yeah. I think for me, I think last season in the 3-0, it was partly that Newcastle never got close to Douglas Luiz.
Yeah.
And I feel like I remember Bruno Guimaraes. Every time Douglas Luiz got the ball, Guimaraes was quite far from him, but every time Guimaraes got the ball, Douglas Luiz was right on his back.
Yeah.
So I think if Newcastle have learnt from that, then it would be more difficult for Luiz to play. But if Luiz still manages to find space, that could be a real problem, I think, in the centre, as we mentioned earlier. And then Leon Bailey as well is just in really, really hot form at the moment. So I'm feeling confident. I'm always feeling good about Villa. I'm always feeling this season. Well, I haven't always felt good about Villa for about 30 years, but this season I am.
Yeah.
So I'm going into this game with probably more confidence than usual against the more recent iteration of Newcastle. But at the same time, very wary of the fact that you can still do a fair bit of damage. So score prediction wise, what are you going to say is going to happen Tuesday night?
Oh, I mean, I just don't know why, because recent form could tell me this could be anything, but I don't see you scoring a great deal past us either way.
Okay.
I think the really important thing is who scores first, because it's like I say, if we do go into that low block, we did it against City and it works until Kevin De Bruyne comes on. I think that's quite a fair challenge to say to Aston Villa, come and score a goal if you think you can. So I think if we score first, we could potentially win 2-0. If you score first, then I think we're going to be in trouble. But I would go probably a 1-1 draw at this stage, just considering our form. That's probably where I'm at. It's not a very optimistic time for us. It's more optimistic than it ever has been in the past. But yeah, at this point in the season, I'd take a draw away at this stage, given our away form.
Yeah, and it's worth iterating as well that we are doing these predictions on Thursday. We're recording this Thursday, so there is still an FA Cup game to come for both Villa and Newcastle. Newcastle away at Fulham, Villa away at Chelsea. So there might be more injuries in store for us. So my thinking might change about that. But just at this moment in time, I'm going to say Villa just eke it out. I'm going to say it's under the floodlights Tuesday night. I think it'll be a really good game. But I'm going to say Villa just get the job done, just about. It won't be easy. But so whilst at the same time thinking Newcastle, as I said already, could do us damage. Something I just wanted to ask you separately as well. With Eddie Howe and the way things have gone this season, do you think, with Newcastle's board now, obviously seeing that it inevitably wants to have regular Champions League football, do you think they'll have patience with Eddie Howe, given that, it hasn't been a brilliant season so far?
I think it's more, I can see how people naturally come to that conclusion and naturally come to that question, but I think it's more, will Eddie Howe have patience with the board?
Right.
Is really where I'm at. I don't see Eddie Howe going anywhere, but I think really any club outside of Manchester City, Arsenal, maybe Man United, Liverpool, etc. Any team outside of that. I mean, if Spurs are in the struggle that they were this summer before Postecoglou, I think they go with Eddie Howe if he's available, given what he's done with Newcastle United now. I think his stock is so high that any team outside of the top six will bite his hand off, will probably, aside from maybe Villa with Unai Emery, would probably drop their manager if he became available. Like it's that really the narrative there. So you got to look back to what we had in the summer. We signed Sandro Tonali, which was supposed to be the kind of insurance policy around Bruno Guimaraes' £100 million release clause. That's not worked out well through kind of no one's fault other than maybe due diligence on the board side. But can you ever really legislate or predict for somebody coming out with a gambling ban that's probably very well hidden?
Yeah.
So I think it's more now, can we overcome these financial fair play problems that we have through years of lack of investment in order to overcome problems that we've had on the pitch? So considering what we've had, we're way ahead of schedule. We've been in the Champions League only one season really after being in a relegation battle. So that this is incredible kind of scenes of change. So for them to put it on Eddie Howe maybe is a question 4 or 5 years in the future for us. I think there's a lot of squad rebuilding to do in the meantime.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, what does a successful season look like now for Newcastle, do you think?
I think a successful season last season would have been top eight, or and so therefore it's very difficult to judge that when you've been in the group of death in the Champions League about what would be successful. What it looked like at the beginning of the season was getting into the Champions League again. What it probably looks like now is qualifying for Europe in any capacity, be that Conference League or Europa League. I know the club will want to say that we need to maintain that Champions League money, but it's just a kind of false prophecy at the moment. It will keep causing problems. So therefore, there does need to be a couple of seasons where, in the summer, our Adidas contract comes in. There's already videos on Twitter of Alexander Isak, Anthony Gordon, and Joe Linton, with Predators and doing the new adverts for Adidas. So we are kind of one of their premier clubs. We need to start seeing more deals like that off the pitch so that the revenue isn't so much relying on outgoings as it is in terms of incomings for transfers. There is a lot of talk at the moment saying that we need to sell to buy. That may be the case. It may be the case that we need to get rid of Bruno Guimaraes if a good offer comes in, because if somebody offers 100 million for him, it's all about what could you do with that money over 3 years. That's a complete kind of first team rebuilder. I think the immediate problems that we need to fix is that we need to look at the bench. We need to kind of, as much as I love these players, we need to look at Matt Ritchie's contract. We need to look at Paul Dummett's contract and when they're running out. We need to look at the fact that we've got, Gillespie and also Loris Karius on our bench as third and fourth choice goalkeepers. So these are the kind of things that the club needs to look at. They are buying young at the moment, and that's the strategy. However, there are some kind of squad players that need to be looked at, and we need to build for that, because outside of our first team, it drops off quite quickly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You mentioned the FFP thing, so it's a very similar situation with Villa, although I think it's different. I think you mentioned the lack of investment, and I imagine that's a legacy of the Mike Ashley era.
Yeah.
I mean, we started going into our youth team investment properly around 2017-18, and we reaped the dividends of that and continuing to reap them at the moment. And I think you just had Lewis Miley come through, but I'd imagine that the board have started. If they've properly invested in the youth team, then I'd imagine you'll start to get some of the youth players coming through. It's just that one of the unfortunate byproducts of FFP is that clubs tend to sell these young players now to. I mean, I broadly agree with FFP to stop kind of, just a random nation state coming in and just buys up everybody's rival players, and because that's essentially Man City did something very similar to that, and just can blow everyone out the water with wages that absolutely nobody can compete with. But at the same time, there is a knock-on effect where it's like teams are now selling youth players, and they're gouging they're having to gouge fans with different, prices and higher prices, and gouge is probably a harsh word, but it's prices are going up, essentially, is how you would say it. So,
yeah. I'd certainly say there's increased demand at Newcastle United from a fan perspective, which is a little bit. It's an amazing thing, but it's also a very unique position where the club kind of feel a bit drunk on that really at the moment, because I mean, earlier on in the season, there was a big questionnaire that went out to the fan base about plans for the future in terms of our stadium. So would we move from St James's Park? But there was a lot of kind of kickback really on some of the questions being like, would you pay 15 grand a year for a tunnel, what's called a tunnel season ticket, where you're able to do this or access this? And it's all kind of things that are way out of your typical fans, I would say, price range, but I would also say like what 90% of people would want from a football experience. It feels very much like we're going to be in armchairs with popcorn next to us in order to kind of raise these revenues. So I disagree with how it's being put on fans quite a lot, and I'd be interested to see how this is going to play out, certainly for teams like Villa and ourselves, who are kind of really best of the rest in terms of that top six, as they always say.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I'm hoping to do a sort of FFP special just to get on this podcast to do a bit about it. But Freddie, it's been absolutely brilliant to chat to you. I always love chatting to you, and I always love the comments we get down below as well. I get a lot of comments from Newcastle fans. I always really enjoy it, and
The
Villa fans
haters
as well.
begin.
Yeah, they always tune in, so I really love it. And as I say, yeah, you're part of the London Mags, an absolutely brilliant group of guys. Honestly, I love meeting you. For those who would like to get involved with it, how can they find you and the London Mags online?
Yeah, thanks for that. They can follow us on Twitter at the London Mags. It's very simple. It's the Newcastle United Sports Club London. And then if you're ever wanting to watch a game and you're in London, just come find us in the Dolphin Pub in King's Cross. It's your first stop after getting off the train.
Brilliant. All right, Freddie. Well, best of luck for the rest of the season, except for Tuesday night, of course.
Always a pleasure, Frankie.